So the industry in Nigeria, as it is, has a lot of issues, and at the same time has a lot of potentials. Unfortunately, the major issues we have to grapple with, the policy issues, basically. In the last 40 years, the industry has been stunted, not because of any other thing, but policy issues. And that's because when the focus is all about the money and not the overall benefits of what aviation could have done for the economy, then it becomes a major challenge. The ICAO provisioning for aviation talks about cost recovery. But the focus of a government in Nigeria is all about revenue generation.
Right.
So that itself is a contradiction of sorts, because I mean, we're signatory to the ICAO convention, and everything about the convention talks about the fact that whatever you earn from aviation must be plowed back into aviation to develop the aviation within the system. But unfortunately, in Nigeria, because of our sort of structure of governance, monies earned in aviation are typically passed on into the central government coffers and used for every other thing but aviation. So what you've found over the years is that infrastructure has decayed, substantially. Right. Passenger numbers have grown, but you do not have the capacity throughput to process all the passengers. So invariably, because of the inadequacy of infrastructure, and of course the stifling policies, we haven't seen the sort of growth that we expect to have in the industry. And again, with all of this, you also have phenomenal growth potentials, which of course throws up all the opportunities we're talking about in the industry. Right. So I think, from a policy perspective, we have a lot of, we have some sort of handicap. And then when we look at what the government has done and is doing, it is not helping growth. But once these things are addressed, and of course, we take cognizance of the fact that infrastructure itself is an enabler itself of growth, then maybe we can start seeing sort of a major challenges being addressed. And of course, we now start seeing the possibilities in the industry. So from my standpoint, I would say that policy issues and infrastructure, both tied in one, will be the major challenges I see. Potentials, tremendous. We have a huge population, and going by that, we're expecting that Nigeria itself should have developed itself into a major hub in the region. If you look at our geopolitical location on the continent, we should be talking about having all the population from different parts of Africa coming through Nigeria to travel out of the continent. So, but unfortunately, because we have not been able to develop what you consider a major hub, we're not able to tap into that potential. So that itself presents a major opportunity in this ecosystem. So this, I believe, it's something we can really look at as a major opportunity to grow into the system and grow the continent from Nigeria.
Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. And of course, infrastructure policy are definitely critical at this point in time. And from previous revenue events we've also seen a few other sectors emphasize on the need to take a deeper dive into this critical areas. So I'm pretty happy that we're also re-echoing saying even within the aviation sector. But I'll still be coming back to you so we can probably even speak a bit much deeper into each of these areas to give people an idea of some of the low-hanging to the high long-term opportunities that lies also within the infrastructure and policy angle of it, and how we can obviously complement the efforts of individuals like yourself on ground. Mr. Tell, coming back to our conversation, I want to take it a little different now, referencing the information technology space. There's really any sector, in the world right now that comes alive without conversation around information technology, right? But here's how I want us to now take a look, dive into this, and this will go next to Captain Iyayi. I do understand the heavy burden on the current, operators, as it were, both from the physical infrastructure point of view, and of course, even the operators themselves who actually have, and both on the domestic and international routes. From an information technology space, standpoint, how would you rate their performance leveraging technology to improve on their services? That's one. Two, what are some of the areas that you probably will spot as challenges that we can also consider exploring, leveraging on some of the expertise of our colleagues out here in the diaspora? Captain Iyayi.
Right, thank you very much. Before I drive into the issue of ICT, let me very quickly add
Please.
to what Tony said about tourism.
Right.
It's important to note that we have 91 airstrips besides the 33 airports. We have 91 chartered airstrips in Nigeria. Now, what that does in a sort of developed economy or developing economy is to actually grow the potential of tourism.
Right.
Now, I was also a member of the Presidential Advisory Council to this new government when we're trying to put together the various policy issues to make it a holistic thing for the government to drive. Unfortunately, whilst we did that for over 3 months and we came up with a huge document that talked about infrastructure and how to tie various sectors of the economy together, it became very evident that, yes, whilst you're willing to do stuff, the government was burdened with the politics because invariably the people who are penciled to take charge of the various sectors were not allowed, apparently from my understanding, to drive that policy element that was put together by this government. But anyways, we hear that maybe in a couple of weeks, there's some sort of reshufflement that's going to take place. Maybe then opportunities will show up for the technocrats have been sort of identified to be put there. But the important thing is this: if the government had taken on those policies and driven the path that's been charted, then of course you would see very quickly fundamental growth in the various sectors. Tourism being one. I mean, the idea was to grow the tourism sector as clusters around aviation. So that's not happening yet, but it's a potential. Now, I mean, assume and imagine, for instance, people coming into the country and wanting to go to a place like Ife because they want.
Yeah, you muted him. Oh.
Yeah.
The travel time between Lagos and Ife, for instance, is about 3.5 hours at best, right? Now, the flying time to Ife is actually about 30 minutes using a 10-seater airplane. You know, so invariably, I'm aware because there's an airstrip being developed in Ife, courtesy the Oni, because he has this tech hub that is developing just, I mean, as you enter Ife. And along to go with that tech hub is going to be a 500-600 meter runway to take small airplanes in there and all the rest of it. So the point is, it's possible to have all these tourism clusters. All you need to do, which the government thought and identified, was to have this sort of holistic policy framework that would address different sectors and tie them together. So to that extent, I think if this government takes the right approach and does the right thing, we may still see that. Now, going back to the issue of ICT, ICT is a function of power. If you do not have adequate power, to sort of, drive, your systems, it becomes almost impossible to be able to take advantage of the technology. I'll give you an example. In aviation, for instance, we do not have any data to actually tell us, precisely how many people travel today. We can guess it because we can tell you, oh, the control tower, from all the numbers of flights, and of course the numbers collated at the end of the day, X number travel. But you see, there's no, the finer detail of such data is what we miss. Because if you're able to have granular data, then you can start planning. But we don't have that. So one of the things that we looked at, which is also part of what we're trying to do, we have developers, by the way, we've used to develop very, very useful applications that we're trying to like put through the entire aviation system. One of them, which is not public yet, is an app that's been developed called Identify. Now, what does it do? Identify is an app that takes cognizance of who you are, because we're able to tie all your identification, all the biometrics you have in the government database. We're able to tie it into that one thing. And then, of course, the whole idea is when you get to the airport today in Nigeria and you're traveling, you're required to provide a positive ID by way of either your passport or driver's license or voter's card or whatever it is. Now, this particular app puts all of this under one roof. So you cannot show up to say you want to fly on any flight if you're not positively identified. And what this does is to take every information from the immigration database, from the population database, ties everything together, and then ties to the back end of the airlines, so that when you purchase, a ticket, immediately the app, identifies you, knows how much you pay, and is able to very quickly do all that is required to get all that information that you have, put it in a database that is now useful to every other sector, even for planning purposes. But we have not launched simply because the backup systems that are required to ensure the credibility of the data and the system itself, they're not there yet. So when you look at it from that standpoint, what are we talking about now? There's a power deficit at the airport. The current minister, the last TV interview I heard, talked about having solar farms, as it were, at airports, which would be alternative power. Now, ideally, we should be talking about this forever. Right. But unfortunately, just like everything else Nigerian, once we're comfortable, we stop thinking. But the thing is, when there's a crisis, that's when you get all the brilliant brains who come out thinking about how to solve problems, But unfortunately, even with all the problem-solving skills, we still have the bottleneck of people saying, well, because their interest is not protected in the solution, then they can't see it thrive. So that's also another thing to surmount. So yeah, power is a major issue that needs to be addressed. The ICT, look, Nigeria has the biggest and the brightest tech hub in Africa. Right. Even Microsoft identifies that. And you see, when you bring around developers, and I'm talking from a standpoint of working with very, very, young guys with brilliant ideas, and I sit with them a couple of times and tell them, look, we have this problem. This is what I think. How do you go about it? We've been able to come up with this Identify that I talked about, for instance, just because we identified the problems and we thought about, okay, look, how can we solve them? And then we brought these young guys together who are very wonderful developers. I mean, that's all they breathe. So you give them the problem, give them the scenario, and let them understand how the systems work. They come up with solutions. So the ICT, the ICT sphere is a major, major opportunity. But the only limiter to the growth in that sector right now is constant power. Okay. So if you're going to do it, then you'll be talking about redundancies in terms of power. You want to have a solar, you want to have a generator, you want to have whatever it is. All of those things are additional costs that if you had a system that worked, will not be required. So yes, whilst you're creating the solutions, because of the fact that you cannot manage costs, because of the deficit we're still talking about, it becomes an expensive venture. Whereas if you did it right and the solutions existed, then it means that all of these things will make things a lot cheaper than it should, than we're talking about today. Right. Okay. So to the extent that we have not addressed the power issue, the benefits we should derive from all the possibilities are still not there. So those are the things I believe we can be looking at. In terms of the airports, we've always believed that having a solar farm can be a tremendous leap forward in terms of being able to provide all that energy that's required to drive the airport. But like I said, we're just looking at it today. They say better late than never. So hopefully with this government, we might end up having solar farms at major airports to drive enough power to make sure systems in the airport work, right? Now, the other thing is, for the consumer experience in Nigerian airports is extremely, very, very archaic. The systems are archaic. As a passenger, you wait and you hope to hear when the announcement is made over the PA system at the airport, or when your flight is good to go, or when it is, the flight is coming in and stuff like that. Whereas, I mean, in your environment, I'm sure you're familiar with the flight information display systems. These are basic stuff that every serious airport should have, but we do not have them. And the reason we don't have them also falls back at the end of the day that, yes, you could install them, but if you don't have the power system to hold them working, then it means that they're useless all the same. So again, we come back to the power issue. So a lot of all the issues that we talk about, ICT is fundamental. I agree with you. The solutions we can get from ICT will sort of simplify a lot of all the processes at the airport. The checking-in system, with a robust ICT system, becomes seamless.
Yes.
So you have passengers that can pick up their phones, check in, get your boarding passes and everything else. So you don't have to, get to the counter before everything is done. We cannot do that just yet because the ICT infrastructure and, because of the limited power, makes it almost impossible. So ICT is an area that I think we have tremendous opportunities on. We have the talents to do it, but the systems to support them is lacking. And I think that's really where, if anything at all, we need to focus. Government needs to look at that. But like I said, there is a plan to sort of, by this government, I'm sure, because I'm aware, if they drive those plans to fruition, then we should see a different aviation industry. For instance, I was a member of like I said, I was a member of the Advisory Council on Infrastructure, and we talked about the need to have a national air connectivity project. The idea of that is to bring in all these small airplanes that we're talking about into the 6 geopolitical zones, develop Abuja as a domestic hub. So all these airplanes from the different airports in the country fly into that hub, feeding Abuja with passengers. And then all the other major carriers out of Abuja can then be fed with passengers from different parts of the country to other destinations. So what it means essentially is that from wherever you are in the country, be it Katsina, be it Maiduguri, be it Sokoto, Kebbi, you can fly through Abuja to any other part of the country. That's a plan. Now, the government understands what's required to have that done. The idea is to acquire 50 19-seater airplanes. And it's out of the US. The structure for the funding and everything was articulated under the Advisory Council. The structure to make sure it works in the 6 geopolitical zones were also articulated. And the whole thing is, if the government buys into it fully, like we say they should, then it means that travel within and around Nigeria becomes seamless. Air travel. And then, of course, it makes it more affordable. Affordability is very key. Because right now, because the capacity is not there, airfares are very expensive. So if you increase capacity appreciably, affordability becomes, within reach. If you have affordability, you'll have more people traveling by air. If you have more people traveling by air, there will be a major reduction in the wear and tear on the roads. The issue of security that we talk about all the time, kidnappings and all the rest of it, will become, reduced substantially. And of course, we're talking about employment. In Nigeria today, we have well over 400 fresh pilots from flying school. And these guys have no jobs because the type of aircraft they can fly, are not there. Like you said, there's no GA. So once you do not have general aviation, it's also a major problem to the development of the industry because that ordinarily should be the teething ground for fresh pilots and engineers, but it's lacking currently. So you find that gap, needs to be bridged. And that's the essence of this air connectivity project, to be able to create affordability, deepen the penetration of aviation, and also create the enabling environment to make sure we can absorb all these young talents into into sort of gainful employment at this point, and groom them over the next decade to prepare them for the major airlines. The government bought into the idea, so we just hope that when the government is able to now put its act together by the end of this month, hopefully, we may see that plan come to fruition. That itself also throws up a lot of opportunities for Nigerians in diaspora who want to invest, because it gives everybody the opportunity to buy into it and then become a stakeholder. So these are things I believe. I know I've digressed quite a bit, but the whole idea is just see the ideas are there, unfortunately, but putting it together and holding it as one whole piece has been the problem. If you have a minister whose interest is all about self and not national, you're not going to get any far.
Right. Well,
we had that in the last government, and if we're going to see anything any different, then we need to have the current minister drive all of this as a national agenda rather than a personal agenda.
Got you. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing, much deeper insight on not just even the opportunities or challenges or the reality check we need to also have with ourselves. We have to explore infrastructures around, the information technology space. I wouldn't consider that a digression at all, Captain, primarily because, again, we are not here trying to give a picture of what's not. We want our partners, we want our attendees, and of course, our professionals here in the diaspora to see the reality of what's on ground. From all that you were saying, I'm sure you were seeing me taking some notes. I was actually seeing opportunities. You understand? Because again, for us to move things forward in Nigeria, it's not about complaining of the challenges, but accepting the challenges that there is and focusing on the solution that we can build and scale over time. So I do really appreciate you, sharing some of those thoughts, and I'm glad that, you did